I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and I'm an honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on a very important topic, especially during this pandemic, and that is a focus on fraud and cybersecurity for our businesses, for our organizations, and even in our own personal lives. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to you today from the unceded traditional territories of our Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen-Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Events like this simply do not take place without sponsorship support. I thank you to the sponsor of this event, our supporting sponsor, MNP. And you're going to hear more about them shortly. Thank you so much to the accounting firm of MNP. Our Business and International Trade Center sponsors is the law firm of Fasken, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by SNF Benefits, and BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. I'd also like to recognize on the call with us this morning is the officer in charge of the Surrey Rcmp, Chief Superintendent Brian Edwards. Thank you, Brian, for being with us this morning. Just some instructions before we begin. All attendees are muted. If you have a question, please put it in the chat function, and I will get to that during the question period of this program. And if we're not able to get to your question, we'll email you the answer after the event is over. Ladies and gentlemen, just a little bit about the Surrey Board of Trade. We are Surrey City Building Business Organization, an independent voice of business, where our whole mandate is to support business and bring business into the city. We're one of the top 10 largest chambers of commerce, boards of trades in Canada. There's 450 of us that have been supporting business during this pandemic. The Surrey Board of Trade is the only one that has a pandemic rapid response business center to be that concierge of connections, to instigate change at the different levels of government. And we're one of 9 organizations on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. We have a direct line into the Prime Minister's office to really ensure that they understand and are putting in programs, knowing what the gaps and opportunities are for businesses, for our cities. So we're there for the business community during the pandemic, beyond the pandemic. We created Canada's first COVID-19 playbook for business as well. Everything is available on our website at businessinsurrey.com. Please check it out. Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. And they're saying by 2030, we're still growing by 1,200, 1,400 people a month. And so the responsibility on organizations like us and partners with our public safety partners, our corporate partners such as Fasken, to really support our business community is so integral. As we face the growth in our city during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic. So I'm so pleased to welcome our first speaker, Jeff Thompson, Senior Rcmp Intelligence Analyst at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. Jeff, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anita, and thanks to the Surrey Board of Trade, MNP, and my colleagues here on the panel today. March is Fraud Prevention Month, and it's a key month for us at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre to promote fraud awareness messaging. This year's theme is the digital economy of scams and frauds, and it's really centered around, focusing on topics such as shopping online, working from home, phishing, online dating, and other scams. And it's really meant to touch on scams and frauds that may have increased due to COVID-19. So as the world has gone through a global pandemic, we know that fraud rates have continued to increase. COVID-19 has created a ripe environment for fraud and online criminal activity. People have maybe never shopped online before, people working from home, doing online banking, more and more people turning to the internet for everyday activities, one could argue that COVID-19 has created, increased the pool of potential victims. In fact, in 2020, the Canadian Fraud Center received more than 101,000 fraud reports involving more than $160 million in reported losses. Moreover, more than 67,000 of these reports were from Canadian consumers and businesses that reported losses totaling more than 104 million. The impacts of fraud are devastating. Homes, life savings, businesses being lost. Fraud continues to be a lucrative criminal enterprise for serious and organized crime. With that said, our theme also reflects on the shared initiative of the shared responsibility of increasing fraud awareness. So encouraging colleagues to recognize, reject, and report fraud. We want to encourage people to get out there and talk about their experiences, to spread the messaging about fraud awareness and fraud prevention, and increase the overall Canadian response to fraud to reduce these activities in Canada. Recognizing fraud means looking for scams that are happening over the phone, email, text messages, the internet, social media. Rejection means slowing down, doing your due diligence, as a business, making sure you have plans and policies in place to train your employees. And reporting revolves around calling the local police, making sure police know about the crimes happening in the community, reporting to the Anti-Fraud Center, and reporting to the service providers, the telephone companies, the email companies, the internet hosting companies about scams that you've identified. Everything needs to happen in a collaborative sense to help reduce fraud. We can turn it over to the next to my next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I know the audience has some questions for you, and we'll get to you during the question period. Thank you so much for your presentation. So our next speaker, and you can turn your video off, Jeff, our next speaker is Jacklyn Davies, partner in the Forensic and Litigation Support Services at MNP. Jacklyn, over to you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you, Jeff, for all the great statistics. We're definitely seeing what you see, and also a thanks to Fasken and the Surrey Board of Trade for having us here this morning. Well, it's been quite a year, and congratulations to everybody at the seminar here that survived this last year, and for those of you thriving, an even bigger congratulations, because it's certainly been a challenge business-wise and personally. So with COVID, it really created an immediate shift in how all of us live, work, and run our businesses. And there really was no time to plan, and it was immediate. And the term pivot came into our lives, and I would like to see it go, but it is with us, and it's with us to stay. Overnight, we were effectively running most of our businesses remotely, and the structure of having remote locations where operations happen really fosters an opportunity for fraud. We've seen that over many years with internal fraud, and now the threats from external sources are even larger because of the amount of business that is operated online and using cloud resources and operations. It just creates that greater opportunity for external parties that are really targeting businesses to extract assets, extract wealth, to really target businesses. And they are educated, they're focused, and that is their sole purpose. For many businesses and individuals, there's more time on your hands. From working remotely, you've got time to surf, and so that also opens up the door for those external resources to come in. They've increased, and let's not forget that the internal threats are still there. So there seems what's happening is there's just the perfect storm of internal threats and external threats, because overlying all of this are financial pressures for the businesses, financial pressures for the individuals within those businesses. And part of what we're seeing is business owners need to react to change quickly. And through that, they don't have the opportunity to take the time and effort to fully vet who you're working with, new employees perhaps coming on, educating them with policies and procedures, because quite frankly, many businesses are just trying to survive. It is the perfect storm for perfect storm for fraud, and really ticks the three corners of the fraud triangle, which is a concept near and dear to forensic accountants' hearts, where you have pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. And when you have those three factors come together, fraud is definitely a risk, and one that needs to be assessed. Your employees are your biggest asset and can be your biggest threat if they don't understand especially with the cyber, what those threats are. There's a lot to deal with that businesses will see in the coming future, and the fundamental changes in operations, namely working remotely. And it is one of those changes that has downsides, but it also has benefits. I know that for myself, I was a firm believer that, working in the office was necessary, and realized and learned that, we can operate remotely with the proper controls in place and considerations, and production still happens. And it's super important for businesses to put those controls in place and considerations so that you can proceed with confidence, as this will be, to quote another catchphrase that's out there now, the new normal. It will be carrying on. So with that, I know we've got a lot of, I'm sure a lot of questions out there, and I will pass it over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacklyn. And now our final presenter is Kaleigh Milinazzo, associate at the law firm of Fasken. Kaleigh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anita. So I think the perspective that I can offer on this panel today is some practical advice on risk management. So if you end up having a fraud issue in your business or a suspected fraud issue, you can be as prepared as possible to investigate, get the right evidence, and ultimately maximize your recovery in any legal proceeding that's necessary. And my first piece of advice, which I think is going to be very unsurprising coming from a lawyer, is to make sure you pick up the phone and get the right advice right away, whether that's a law firm that has experience in fraud recovery. Depending on the issue, you may need to engage other experts like forensic accountants, digital forensic investigators that have experience in recovering things that have been deleted. And if you're dealing with something like a consumer data breach, you may need PR help. So I think a core thing to remember is it's important to think about who you're going to need advice from, and have those experts in your back pocket if and when an issue should arise. And I think it's also very important to be proactive about these issues, and to really set yourself up to move quickly if you do have to deal with an issue of fraud in your business. So to really know who you're doing business with, have good records of who your suppliers, vendors, customers are, and be always vigilant. I'm sure Jeff will have some information for us about the different identity scams out there, but I know we've seen it a lot in the legal world, where people think that they're wiring money to their realtor or their lawyer, and then it very unfortunately turns out later that it's a mistaken identity. They've just switched the email address a letter or two. And my third piece of advice is, it's very important, if you suspect or fall victim to an issue of fraud, to move quickly to get the evidence and the data that you need secured right away. You're going to have a problem proving your case or ultimately recovering down the road if you just don't have the good, strong evidence that you need. And so part of that is, as I mentioned earlier, making sure you've got the right experts on board and the right team to help you through. And I think it's also important to be aware of some of the tools at your disposal. When you're dealing with fraudsters, as Jackie mentioned, they're very skilled, very determined, move money and assets quickly and creatively, so they can run away with the proceeds, and you and your business won't see them again. And the law gives us some quite extraordinary remedies to deal with these situations. So you can, if you have strong evidence in the right case, go in without notice and get an order to freeze bank accounts. You can get an order to effect what is essentially a civil search warrant. So when you see FBI agents banging on the door and turning up drawers, you can get an order to have documents and computers seized before you've had a final determination of your claim, to make sure that you have the right evidence. And that's something that my colleagues have experience in and have used to secure the evidence when needed. So I think my themes, to sum up, are: think ahead, think about these issues in advance, because I think for most businesses, it's not a will this happen, it's just a when this will happen. And be careful and diligent and act quickly to preserve the evidence so you can maximize your recovery.
Thank you so much, Kaleigh. And Jacklyn and Jeff, if I can ask you to put your video on, we're going to proceed to the question period of the portion of the program. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat function and I will get to it as soon as I can. But we're going to tap into the expertise of our fine panelists. And Jeff, my first question is to you. How has COVID-19 changed the landscape for fraud to occur? Has it really changed, or has the pandemic really enhanced the ability of fraudsters to take advantage of businesses and individuals? And Jacklyn, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Thanks again, Anita. Yeah, I mean, so for us, fraud has always been international in scope, right? Oftentimes, we know fraudsters operating in one country are targeting victims in another country with money going to a third different country, and that's very simplistic view. What COVID-19 has done is increase the prospective pool of victims at the end of the day. If I go back to my open remarks, where we see more and more people online today, everyday shopping, working from home, looking for companionship. More and more people are isolated. They're at home. They're alone. You've been forced to lock down and stay home. And then you bring in the emotions or the psychology of the pandemic, the anxiety, the fear, what's going to happen next. So we know fraudsters also play on emotions. Scams are designed to create a sense of urgency. They're designed to get people to react, businesses to react. And when you're sitting at home and you've already got that anxiety and you get one of these messages, whether it's a spear phishing attack, a phishing attack, and I'll go through some of the different scams later, the emotions have a role to play in how people react. So again, it's that increased pool of prospective victims, potential victims that they can target. And then it's the and an increased opportunity at the end of the day for them. And then the emotions and the psychology of the pandemic itself has created, again, a ripe environment for fraud.
Jacklyn, your perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Jeff said, and it's what we're seeing with our clients as well. Businesses, as MMP deals with a lot of mid-size and smaller business, larger businesses. So there is that concern and pressure with more opportunity for employees to be at home working, surfing, that type of thing, and so it opens up the opportunity for that external threat to come in. And I would also reinforce what Kaleigh said, is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, that those external threats are going to focus on the businesses. So where there might not have been as much emphasis placed on external threats for businesses, that's changed, because there is the open opportunity for more people to be accessing the internet and the phishing scams, as Jeff talked about. We've had clients that have, experienced employees getting those emails that come in, and the pressure and the urgency to go and, react to the request that's being made, and without, proper thought. And that's where we'll talk a little bit about training, I know, but that's where really the training of employees is so very important.
Jeff, just one in-between question is, so if a business or if a person is facing fraud of any type, who do they phone? Do they phone the Rcmp? Do they phone the non-emergency line? Do they phone 911?
So a victim of fraud is a victim of crime, and crimes at the start of it need to be reported to your local police, whether you're a business or an individual. You pay taxes in a community, and those police are there to serve you. And it's the local police who are initially responsible for collecting the victim evidence and information, and to initiate that investigation. And if it escalates above that, they can request assistance for provincial, national, or even international partners in law enforcement to further that investigation. But in all cases of fraud, it is a crime and it needs to be reported to the police at the very start. The Anti-Fraud Center is not an investigative body. Our role is to central source the information. It's to deconflict with police services across Canada and internationally. We use the information we collect to develop fraud prevention awareness messaging for Canadians, consumers, and businesses. We use it to support operations and investigations, and we also use it for disruption. So if we can work with, again, the service providers to get an email account shut down, or a phone number blocked, or a bank account blocked, that's essentially our role here. But at the end of the day, again, fraud should be reported to your police of jurisdiction, your local police.
A question to all of you, but I'm going to start with Kaleigh from Fasken, is why do businesses need to worry about information security? Why is that so important? Kaleigh, over to you.
I think it's ultimately the consequences can be so significant. I mean, we've just seen so many unfortunate examples. One of the big law firms internationally was victim to a ransomware attack where they had a hacker. I don't know, Jeff can tell us how these attacks work, I don't know the details, but their entire law firm was paralyzed. They couldn't access their client files. They couldn't do anything. And I'm not sure whether or not they ultimately ended up paying the ransom, but I know a lot of companies in that case sometimes do. So I think the short answer is these kinds of attacks and issues can be absolutely devastating to a business.
And Jacklyn from MMP, what's your perspective on information security measures?
It's paramount. I mean, data is commerce now. If you're an organization that collects personal information such as credit cards, numbers, dates of birth, that type of information, that personal information, that has value. And that's part of, in certain situations, why the hacks start. And as much as to echo what Kaleigh said, if you don't have access to your data as well, not only is it actually saleable, that data, if somebody hacks into your system and grabs it, but if somebody hacks into your system and puts on ransomware, you don't have access to that information anymore. You can't run your business. You are paralyzed. So protecting that information is absolutely paramount.
And Jeff, from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, your perspective on information security measures, and if you're stuck with ransomware, someone's done this to you, you know, what's the next step?
Yeah, so ransomware, for those who may not be familiar, and hopefully nobody needs to become familiar, it's essentially a malware that locks down either your whole system, your network. It can lock down specific files on a computer, and you're going to get a note from the cyber thieves saying, we've locked your files, and in order to unlock this, you need to send us money via cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ether, or some other means. So as you're saying, your data is a commodity at the end of the day. Personal and financial information is a commodity. It can be bought, stolen, traded by criminals. And that's essentially what they're after. It's financially driven crime, but they're out there to steal your information, whether it's intellectual property information, or even just gaining access to your network. You know, it's just being able to use your computing power. Bot herding is another thing that we see to financial gain, right? So criminals are targeting businesses for financial gain. The information and data you have is a commodity, and they are going to go after it. We're seeing, you know, small, medium enterprises, large enterprises. Nobody's immune to the frauds and cyber crimes happening today.
Jeff, what are the biggest cybersecurity threats that businesses and individuals need to be aware of?
So from a top reported business scam perspective from the Anti-Fraud Center, what we're seeing right now, outside of COVID-19 fraud. So maybe I'll start there. You know, with the pandemic, you know, a number of businesses hopping online to procure personal protective equipment. You know, so there was a number of fake websites or fraudulent websites set up selling non-existent goods at the end of the day. So again, being forced to do more business online and shop online, the fraudsters took advantage of that. And that, you know, merchandise scams is one of the biggest ones we've seen, where some businesses have lost, you know, tried to procure hundreds of $1,000s worth of PPE equipment and not received anything at all. Outside of that, we also see extortion, which is what we talked about with the ransomware. So different extortion scams, with ransomware being one of the primary ones, but also other email extortion campaigns where, say, employees or businesses get emails threatening DDoS attacks, where they're going to, you know, a distributed denial of service attack, where they're, you know, threatening to lock down your whole system again if money is not paid. The other big one is spear phishing, which has sort of been alluded to so far in our dialogue. Spear phishing attacks is another email attack. In this case, the fraudsters are sending an email that looks like it's coming from somebody within your business, somebody that you know, and asking for an urgent transaction to occur. So often, you know, it's referred to as the business executive scam. Initially, a lot of these scams started with, you know, an email that looked like it came from the president or CEO of a company, and it went to the accounts payable saying, I'm working outside the office, I'm working abroad, or whatever the sales line was, and I need you to conduct this urgent transaction. We've seen this scam also evolve to where they've been able to interject with communications with contracts or suppliers. So you might be, you know, in the process of making a routine purchase of supplies from one of your known suppliers, and then you're going to get an email from that supplier saying, we've changed our banking information. Can you please send your payment to this new account? And that's the supplier swindle is what we call that. And again, it's the fraudsters. When you send that money, it's going to a fraud account. So they've interjected themselves in that communication, and it's essentially spoofing. So spoofing, the idea of spoofing is where they make themselves look like a known source. They're mimicking communications to make it seem as though it's coming from somebody you know and trust, and you're likely to follow those instructions. The other variations, and I mean, spear phishing, there's about 4 or 5 different variations, but the last one I'll touch on is the payroll spoof. So essentially where, you know, your payroll department might get an email that looks like it's coming from an employee saying, I've updated my banking information, I've changed banks. can you please send my paychecks to this new account? So in all cases, these spear phishing attacks happen via email. Email is probably one of the most vulnerable points of attack with cybercrime and fraud. And again, it's, they're designed to look like it's coming from somebody you know, so they're built on trust, and they're asking for something urgent to happen in many cases. So an urgent transfer transaction to take place. So again, this goes back to my opening comments where policies and plans in place, training employees are two key things to have so that we can help prevent or reduce some of this fraud.
And Jacklyn from MNP, financial records, accounting, tell me your perspective about, the biggest cybersecurity threats from that perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, but it mirrors really the threats mirror exactly what Jeff's been saying, and that's what we see. And we do have a cyber group that we work with. I'm on the forensic side, so we work with that group that really investigates after something happens as to how it actually occurred. So the infiltration, the spear phishing, and through our discussions, what we find is the attackers will come in through, for example, malware with a Trojan horse and hang out in your computer, in your system for a while, learning language, learning how to social engineer these emails within the organization, so that when that email lands on, say, the accounts payable's desk in their inbox, it sounds like the controller, it sounds like the CEO. So and then it has the added pressure so that they do react. And I know of one case where, money was wired over to China, for example, for $300,000. It landed in the account. It was gone within 5 minutes and it was an innocent account actually on the other side. That money was gone. And then they went back for another. So, which thankfully was stopped, but this is the type of thing that's happened. One tip that we have trained actually our employees with as well is to hover over the email address that comes in and just really take a look at it and see what the full email address is before you click and respond. If there's anything in your body that says this doesn't feel right, pay attention to that.
Thank you. You would think that they would use their intelligence for more productive mechanisms to improve our economy, but it's just so problematic, with people trying to get these opportunities for themselves. But from a legal perspective, I wanted to understand, Kaleigh from Fasken, what the business compliance obligations are as it relates to fraud, cybersecurity.
Anita, I think that's something that's going to look different for every business. I think it's really variable, the size of your business, the nature of your business, and the common thread, though, is I think there's an expectation at the board level that compliance issues, fraud issues are front of mind. So, for example, if you're a business that is dealing with a large volume of cash, and you've got one trusted person that every week deals with that cash, thinking about what kinds of checks and balances do you have in place to make sure that that's happening in a risk-free, well, not a risk, nothing is risk-free, but in a way that manages your risk effectively as a business. And I think some other high level points to keep in mind and think about are consumer data, making sure that your records are up to audit standards, and thinking about your type of business and what type of specific compliance obligations might be engaged. Are you doing business overseas? Do you need to be aware of the Corruption of Public Officials Act? And, are any of the emergency orders that we're seeing and dealing with today, do those impact your business? So I think really the answer is it depends on the shape and size of your business is going to look different for everyone, but fraud and compliance issues really should be at the forefront of director and officer decision making.
And the employees also need to be engaged as well, don't you think, Kaleigh?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the front line of where the fraudsters are getting in.
You know, Jeff had mentioned earlier that if a business believes that they're a victim of fraud or even an individual, that they should phone the RCMP. They are a victim of crime, right? But from a legal perspective, Kaleigh, you know, what really are the next steps in addition to doing that, phoning the RCMP or phoning your public safety official? What are the next steps for a business?
Yeah, so I think what I alluded to in my introduction, make sure that you're getting legal advice right away, not sitting on it, not waiting and trying to investigate and figure it out internally, because like Jackie explained, the money can move in 5 minutes. Things can go fast and happen fast, and you're dealing with very, in some of these cases, very sophisticated fraudsters. So you may need to have a lawyer running into court immediately trying to get some accounts frozen, trying to get the evidence seized. So it's important to get legal advice right away, in addition to some of the other experts that I mentioned. I mean, not all frauds are different, but you may need to get forensic accounting advice and have a more technological look at things as well.
And Jacklyn, from MNP's perspective, tell me about your, you know, the money is at risk in a business. We believe that there's fraud. We phoned the RCMP, we phoned our lawyer. What is our accountant's role in terms of financial oversight?
Well, as Kaleigh alluded to, there may be an opportunity to go in and really examine the records from a forensic accounting standpoint. That is my background. And what that does is it typically supports then any sort of actions that can be taken by legal counsel, which is important. We typically work with legal counsel and have worked with the police as well, because there can be separate avenues with respect to pursuit of the losses. And Kaleigh can speak obviously from the legal standpoint as to whether you may have a civil claim or a criminal claim, obviously, when you go to the RCMP or your local police force, to pursue either recovery or charges. So you need to have that accounting evidence if you are going after recovery and certain legal processes that can be pursued by the company or by an individual, for that matter, to potentially recover your money.
Wow. So if you're a victim of fraud, you need to phone the police, you need to phone your lawyer, and you need to phone your accountant. And it becomes complicated and really full of anxiety for a business owner or for a manager. But Jacklyn, I also wanted to ask you, you know, it's not only, you know, this subject is not only related to businesses. What about not-for-profits,
Ah.
service organizations and charities? They're bringing in money too. They're running their organization like a business. Is ascertaining risk, fraud, cybersecurity important for them?
In a word, absolutely. They're dealing with money, they're dealing with information, they're dealing with the trust of those people that either donate money or rely on those charities. So I would say, you know, there's a different level of obligation with respect to the not-for-profits. And the challenge really with not-for-profits and what we see, depending on the size, because there can be your minor hockey league, there can right up to, you know, the larger recognizable charities. So what is unique about the not-for-profits is it's not a profit-oriented business, obviously, by the name, but here's the thing: they run usually on tight budgets and really lean and mean, which means that it impacts the processes that can be put in place and the controls. Oftentimes, there are volunteers that are put into positions of dealing with money, and they're not prepared to deal with it. You don't know who they are. that type of thing. So you really, as a not-for-profit, need to concentrate on those controls, the risks, and understanding really where your vulnerabilities are, because you still are running a business. It's just within a different structure. And one thing that I can relay, and it'd be it's a good resource to look at the ACFE website. There's the 2020 report to the nation, and in that report, the latest one, they had 191 cases with a median loss for not-for-profits of $75,000, with the average loss of $639,000. So there is a severe financial impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, what's your advice to companies, small businesses, service organizations, not-for-profits about getting a third-party IT person designated?
So yeah, I mean, whether it's a third party or somebody in-house, as we've heard, there's different avenues for different size of businesses and enterprises to follow. But certainly it's worth having somebody dedicated to the security plan, whether it's cybersecurity or corporate security and so on. And that person, it can be from training employees and orientation packages, developing PowerPoints, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a third party. It can be somebody in-house, depending on the size of your business. But the key is that what we'd like to hear or see is that businesses do have a plan in place, so that they can react, so they are training people to recognize and reject the frauds and cybercrimes happening.
Kaleigh, what is cybersecurity insurance? What is that?
My understanding is it would be a discrete policy that would cover losses and investigative costs from some of the different scams that we've heard Jeff describe. And I think really the key point is to not assume that your business would be covered for those kinds of losses. I think most general commercial liability policies would, I mean, I'm not an insurance lawyer, but they probably deny you if you tried to claim losses from a data breach or a cyber attack. So I think the real takeaway is, in part of assessing the risks that face your business and looking at your insurance portfolio, consider whether discrete cyber security insurance is something that might suit your business. And my understanding is that the brokers work with you to assess, what are the risks facing your business, and how robust are your internal checks and balances, and then your premiums are likely to vary based on what your business looks like and faces.
Do you recommend, Kaleigh, that businesses, not-for-profits, get cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, I think it's just so it's so variable. It just depends on the type of business and whether it makes sense for you and what that cost is going to look like and whether or not it fits into your risk profile.
Jacklyn from M&P, how do you align information security and business priorities? How do you strike that balance between protection and convenience, and monetary cost, frankly, to protect oneself is really the difficult part. What's your perspective on that?
Geez, that's a tough question, and it's really unique to each organization and risk tolerance to the business owner. So there's going to be those that are willing to take on more risk than others, and the best advice that we give different all organizations, which does actually address that uniqueness, is to recommend a risk-based approach. So each business owner, they should assess their business as they know it, and they may actually, and it's good to get other views, because one view isn't always the best view of the organization. You should actually invite comment from those that are in your organizations, and to a certain extent, and one of the approaches that I have heard is you ask your rank and file employees, how would you kill your business? And that'll actually, they know where the risks are, and get their input. which really comes back down to the whole concept of your employees are, so very important. And they're the ones that can help you pinpoint where those risks are. And back to the discussion around insurance, what you're not going to protect with your procedures and policies, insure for.
Kaleigh from Fasken, can you just enhance our understanding about the importance of documented policies around compliance? So for example, not-for-profits, they're audited annually. Businesses, in terms of, strict practices and policies for their workforce. Can you tell us the importance of that from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think from a legal perspective and also a practical perspective, putting in place a policy gives you the chance to think through, okay, what happens if our law firm is held at ransom? What happens if we have a major employee theft event? So thinking proactively about the procedures that staff should follow, who's responsible for dealing with the media, who's going to be the documents person. And so I think if you've thought about all these things in advance and have a policy and a plan in place, you're much better off from a legal perspective in terms of your likelihood of eventually recovering your loss, because you'll be able to move more nimbly and more quickly to deal with the issues as they arise.
Jeff from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, what do you see as the first step or most important to protect against being a victim? Any advice?
For us, yeah, it comes back to training, right? And I think we heard earlier on that it's not really a matter of preventing at this point. It's about being prepared for when it happens. So having the plan in place is really key to reducing the impact of any sort of security incident. That being said, education is really key to reducing fraud and cybercrime, educating employees at every level. And again, that can happen through, whether you're getting third-party services or vendors that offer training type packages, or asking an employee in-house to be your training coordinator. And then those people can use, there's resources out there that are free as well. I mean, our Canadian Center for Cybersecurity has a great document, Get Cyber Safe for Small Medium Enterprises. It takes you through, it's a 60-page document, but it's a very good solid document that we reference all the time here at the Anti-Fraud Center when we're dealing with businesses that have been impacted, right? So the information is out there for you to develop your plans and your policies and training for your employees.
Kaleigh from Fasken, a question from the audience relates to a subject we were talking about earlier, where they had a scenario where a fraud email was sent from one of their staff's inboxes to a client. They were instructed to send money to a subsidiary in Indonesia. If the client sent the money, would they as a company be held responsible legally for the funds that the client sent to the fraudster?
So sorry, can you give that to me one more time? Who is the client in the scenario?
So the scenario is a fraud email was sent from one of their staff inboxes to a client. They were instructed to send money to a subsidiary in Indonesia. If the client sent the money, would they as a company be held responsible legally for the funds?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, there's an expectation that businesses are training their employees, that they're aware of these sorts of issues and are able to, not do those kinds of things when they come in. So I think that just really underscores the importance of awareness and training. And this is jumping back a bit to one of your earlier questions, balancing business priorities and cost, and awareness doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a huge undertaking where you hire some fancy expensive third-party consultant. There's tons of great resources online that are available. I'm sure the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has a lot of great resources that are available. So in terms of managing your potential future liability, I think engaging with those resources and making sure your employees are aware and trained is very important.
So Jacklyn from MNP, how do you train employees on cybersecurity? What's your advice on that?
Well, there's been a lot of suggestions from both Kaleigh and Jeff, and they're all good ones. There's lots of resources out there now, because I think it's well known that there is this need for training. What I would add to, obviously, there's the online free resources. There's different agencies as well as companies that do provide that training. But to reinforce that training, you can have group discussions within the employee group to really work through scenarios and share those ideas within your own company, and talk about scenarios. So, when you're just given a pile of information, you don't really understand it until you actually see it, and walk through a scenario. So that would be the added comment that I would have for that.
Jeff from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, what are the risks from your perspective of online shopping for both a business and a consumer? Even beyond the pandemic, online shopping is going to continue. It was happening before the pandemic. What do we need to pay attention to, Jeff?
So as a business, one of the big business scams that we see still is what we refer to as victim vendor fraud or sale of merchandise fraud. So as a business, if you're selling goods online, you're subject to be targeted by fraudsters looking to buy goods, either paying for it with stolen or compromised credit cards, paying for it with counterfeit checks, or even setting up false purchase orders where they make it look like it's an order coming in from, again, a trusted contact or buyer that asking for a purchase order and asking for goods to be shipped in an urgent fashion. So that's from a business. If you're selling goods, things to be aware of there. In terms of purchasing, it's really about knowing the true market value of the goods, whether you're a consumer business, the goods that you're buying, right? Often cases, what we see with online shopping scams or merchandise scams is that sort of too good to be true adage, where people are buying goods at greatly reduced prices. If you buy 1,000 face masks today, we're going to give them to you at $1 a mask instead of $2. So really doing your due diligence, knowing the true value of the goods you're buying, researching the websites or merchants you're buying from. Try and buy from reputable and known sources, obviously, and pay with a protected mechanism as well, right? So when you're buying goods online, different payment mechanisms offer fraud protection policies, such as credit cards, where if you are a victim of fraud, you can dispute the charges. If you buy something with a credit card and you don't get anything at all, you can call that number on the back of your credit card and dispute those charges.
So closing comments by each of you in terms of what layers of protection should we put in place to protect our business from falling victim from each of your perspectives. So Kaleigh from Fasken, let's begin with you.
Yeah, I think it's building a culture of compliance in your workforce. And I think so often, when you're dealing with internal fraud, it's driven by such human elements. If someone's having huge personal financial pressure, that can build into the risk that your company might be facing to internal fraud. And so I think just constantly engaging in that process of risk assessment, developing the controls in your business to have robust financial records and efficient systems to deal with these issues, and having, again, I think it's just that culture of compliance and having these issues at front of mind.
Jacklyn from MNP, your perspective.
Again, I would mirror what Kaleigh says. It's the culture, and in addition to that, the policies and procedures are so important. The controls that are in place. Again, back to the fraud triangle. You've got the pressures. We're all under this pandemic pressure. You can't remove that. What you can do is educate employees so that they can deal with it a little bit better. The controls are in place to minimize the opportunity for fraud. And if you have that culture of trust and confidence within your employees, the rationalization can be minimized as well. The other thing that I would add is when you're doing your risk assessments, doing the controls, documenting things, that's a point in time. Your business is dynamic, it changes. You need to revisit those controls and policies and procedures at regular intervals or when there's significant change. And that way you're best armed to deal with the new situations that are coming up. And always don't be afraid to seek out professionals for assistance with all those points.
And Jeff, the final word from you.
Yeah, so I mean, reiterating what my colleagues have said here, but what I'll add in is from a cybersecurity standpoint is protecting your computers and your computer systems both individually and at a corporate level, right? Ensuring your operating systems are up to date, ensuring you have antivirus software, securing your online accounts, using strong passwords and unique passwords across different accounts, enable two-factor authentication where possible. Secure your devices and internet connections. Using a VPN is something you hear more frequently today. And then it comes back to training your employees about cybersecurity and fraud, having policies and plans in place. When we talked about business email compromises, this can include making sure you limit your authority of your employees. Only certain people conduct transactions. Maybe there's a confirmation process where verbal confirmation is needed, like you're not going to conduct a transaction based on an email that you receive. And again, just having your employees know where to go when they suspect fraud, or if there's something's off, who do they call next, right? Is another key thing. In a lot of cases, employees don't know what steps they should have taken or where to go or what their first call should have been. So that's always a key step as well.
Thank you so much, Kaleigh, Jacklyn, and Jeff, for presenting to us today. And ladies and gentlemen, when we're addressing fraud or cybersecurity, it isn't about only taking a look at it once. It's an ongoing daily journey for a business, for a service organization, for a personal consumer. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our supporting sponsor, MNP. And of course, our Business and International Trade Center sponsors, the law firm of Fasken, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, represented by SNF Benefits, and BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, check out businessinsurrey.com for all of our amazing services and programs to support businesses. Make it a great business day.